When the phone rang at 3:47 in the morning on that cold February night, I knew my life was about to change forever. But I never could have imagined just how completely everything I believed would crumble to dust. The voice on the other end was formal, distant, speaking in that careful tone government officials use when they deliver news that will shatter someone's world. "Mrs. Catherine Wells, this is Agent Morrison from the State Department. I'm calling about your husband, David Wells." My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. David had been working overseas for his engineering firm for the past 8 months, building infrastructure in remote areas of South America. Our calls had become less frequent in recent weeks, but I had attributed that to the demanding nature of his project. "There's been an accident," Agent Morrison continued. "A bridge collapsed during construction. I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband was among the casualties. His body was recovered yesterday." The words hit me like physical blows. David. My David of 15 years. The man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning. The man who still left little notes in my lunchbox even after all these years of marriage. Gone. "Are you certain it's him?" I whispered, though I don't know why I asked. Deep down, I knew it was true. The silence from David's end had been too complete, too final. "We've confirmed his identity through dental records and personal effects. Mrs. Wells, I know this is incredibly difficult, but due to the remote location and the condition of the remains, we strongly advise against attempting to bring the body back for burial. The local authorities will handle the arrangements with full dignity." I agreed, because I had no strength to argue, no will to fight bureaucracy while drowning in grief. David would be buried in foreign soil, thousands of miles from home, and I would never even get to say goodbye. The funeral service I held 3 weeks later was a memorial only, an empty casket, flowers sent by his co-workers, and the overwhelming silence of a life cut short. His engineering firm, Harrison Associates, sent a generous settlement check and his final paycheck. His life insurance paid out without question. Everything was handled with the cold efficiency of death in the modern world. For 6 months, I lived in a fog of grief. I took a leave of absence from my job as a high school English teacher. I stopped answering the phone unless it was absolutely necessary. My sister Linda drove down from Portland twice to check on me, but even she eventually had to return to her own life, leaving me alone with my sorrow. The house felt enormous without David's presence. Every room held memories that both comforted and tortured me. His coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher where I'd left it that last morning before he flew out. His clothes still hung in the closet because I couldn't bear to pack them away. Sometimes I would catch a hint of his cologne lingering in the bathroom and break down crying all over again. I began seeing a grief counsellor, Dr. Patricia Reed, who helped me understand that healing wasn't about forgetting David, but about learning to carry the love without the crushing weight of loss. She encouraged me to start small routines that weren't connected to him. I began taking evening walks around the neighbourhood, something David and I had never done together because he was always working on some project in the garage. It was during one of these walks, about 7 months after David's supposed death, that I first noticed the changes in our neighbourhood. The Hendersons had sold their house and moved to Florida. A young couple with twin toddlers had moved into the blue house at the corner. Mrs. Patterson across the street had finally replaced her broken fence. Life had continued moving forward while I was frozen in grief. Slowly, very slowly, I began to rejoin the world. I returned to work part-time in September. My students were gentle with me, understanding that their teacher had been through something terrible. Teaching again gave me purpose, a reason to get up and shower and face each day. The routine was healing. I started making small changes to the house. Not big ones, I wasn't ready for that yet, but little things that made the space feel less like a shrine to David and more like a home where I was learning to live alone. I rearranged the living room furniture. I planted new flowers in the front garden, choosing colours David had never liked. I bought myself new sheets for our bed because the old ones smelled too much like him. By Christmas, I had begun to believe I might actually survive this loss. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it had become something I could carry rather than something that carried me. I spent the holidays with Linda's family in Portland, and for the first time in almost a year, I laughed at something genuinely funny. Dr. Reed encouraged me to start thinking about the future, not dating, that seemed impossible and wrong, but other kinds of growth. Maybe I could take that pottery class I'd always wanted to try. Maybe I could finally write the novel I'd been planning since college. Maybe I could travel to some of the places David and I had always said we'd visit someday. It was in this fragile state of healing that I returned home on January 15th, 1 year and 11 months after David's supposed death. The house felt different when I walked in, not bad different, but like it was becoming mine rather than ours. I had actually been looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and a cup of tea. I had just settled into my reading chair when I heard the knock at the door. It wasn't the polite tap of a neighbour or the confident rap of a delivery driver. It was hesitant, almost uncertain, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I set down my book and walked to the door, expecting perhaps a lost delivery or a child selling something for school. When I opened the door, my world exploded into 1,000 pieces all over again. David stood on my doorstep. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, but flesh and blood David with sun-weathered skin and longer hair than I remembered. His eyes, those familiar green eyes that had looked at me with love for 15 years, now held something I didn't recognize. Guilt, fear, shame. Behind him stood a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. The child had David's eyes, David's stubborn cowlick, David's crooked smile. "Catherine," David said, and his voice was the same voice that had whispered, "I love you," 1,000 times, the same voice that had said goodbye at the airport 23 months ago. "I can explain everything." I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. My vision tunneled. My heart felt like it might actually stop beating. This couldn't be real, this couldn't be happening. David was dead. I had grieved him, buried the memory of him, learned to live without him. "You're dead," I whispered, the words sounding absurd even as I said them. "You died in South America. The bridge collapsed. The State Department called me. You're dead." The woman behind him, God, she was beautiful in that effortless way some women are, stepped forward. "Mrs. Wells," she said in accented English, "I am Maria Santos. This is my son Diego, and this is David Santos. My husband. My husband." The words rang in my ears like church bells, drowning out everything else. David Santos. Not David Wells anymore. Someone else's husband now. I stood there in my doorway, wearing the old sweater David had bought me for Christmas 3 years ago, staring at the man I had mourned, the man whose death had nearly destroyed me, the man who was now standing on my porch with his new family like some twisted version of Christmas carolers. "Catherine," David said again, taking a step closer, "please, let me explain. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought, wasn't it? My supposedly dead husband had been living in South America for almost 2 years with another woman and their child. He had let me believe he was dead while he built a new life, a life that didn't include me. I looked at the little boy again. Diego. He had to be at least 4, which meant David had been with this woman before he even left for his assignment. While I was packing his suitcases and making sure he had his passport and worrying about him being so far from home, he was already planning a life without me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How long have you been alive while I thought you were dead? How long have you been married to her while still married to me?" David's face crumpled. "Catherine, please, just let us come in. The neighbours are starting to notice. We can talk about this inside." The neighbours. He was worried about the neighbours seeing him. After letting me grieve him for almost 2 years, after letting me plan a funeral and cry myself to sleep and learn to live as a widow, he was worried about gossip. "No," I said, finding strength I didn't know I still had. "You don't get to worry about the neighbours. You don't get to come into my house and explain this away. You let me think you were dead, David. Dead. Maria stepped forward again, and I could see she was trying to keep Diego from understanding the full weight of what was happening. Mrs. Wells, please, we have nowhere else to go. We came here because David said you were a good person, that you would understand. Understand? I almost laughed, but it would have come out as a scream. What was I supposed to understand? That my husband had faked his death to run away with another woman? That while I was barely functioning from grief, he was playing happy family in South America? That the man I had loved and trusted with my whole heart was capable of this level of cruelty? I don't understand anything, I said, looking directly at David. I don't understand how the man I married could do this. I don't understand how you could let me suffer like this. I don't understand how you could be so selfish, so cruel. David's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he looked like the man I had married. But that man was gone. That man had died in South America, just not in the way I had been told. The accident was real, he said desperately. The bridge did collapse. People did die. I was supposed to die. But I survived, and when I woke up in the hospital with no identification, no way to prove who I was, I saw it as a sign, a chance to start over. A chance to start over, while I was planning his funeral. I closed my eyes and tried to make sense of this nightmare. When I opened them again, David, Maria, and Diego were still standing there, still real, still destroying everything I thought I knew about my life. This was just the beginning, I realized. Whatever explanation David thought he had, whatever he believed could justify what he had done, I knew with absolute certainty that my life was about to be torn apart all over again. But this time, it wouldn't be by grief. This time, it would be by betrayal so deep, so complete, that I wasn't sure I would survive it. The man I had loved was alive, standing 3 feet away from me. And I had never hated anyone more in my entire life. I slammed the door so hard that the glass panels rattled. My whole body was shaking as I leaned against it, as if David might try to force his way in. Through the wood I could hear muffled voices, David's desperate tone, Maria's softer responses, and Diego asking questions in Spanish that I couldn't understand, but somehow knew were about why the lady looked so angry. My legs gave out, and I slid down the door until I was sitting on the cold hardwood floor of my entryway. The same floor where David used to drop his keys every evening when he came home from work. The same floor where he would kick off his boots and call out, "Honey, I'm home," in that cheerful voice that used to make my heart skip a beat. The knocking started again, more insistent this time. "Catherine, please," David's voice came through the door. "I know you're angry, but we need to talk. There are things you don't understand." Things I didn't understand. The rage that rose in my chest was so fierce I thought it might actually burn me from the inside out. I understood perfectly. I understood that my husband was a liar. I understood that he was a coward. I understood that he had chosen to let me suffer the worst pain of my life rather than face the consequences of his betrayal. I pulled myself up from the floor and walked to the living room window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtains. David was pacing on my front porch, running his hands through his hair in that gesture I knew so well. Maria was sitting on my porch swing, the porch swing David and I had installed together 5 years ago, holding Diego on her lap. The little boy was eating what looked like crackers from a small bag, completely unaware that his presence was destroying a woman's world. As I watched them, details began to sink in that I had been too shocked to notice at first. David looked healthy, well-fed, tan from the South American sun. His clothes were nice, not expensive but clean and well-maintained. Maria's dress was simple but pretty, and she wore a thin gold wedding band that caught the porch light. Diego's shoes were new, his little jacket clean and properly fitted. This wasn't a family in crisis. This wasn't a family running from danger or poverty or desperation. This was a family that had made a deliberate choice to come here, to my door, to turn my life upside down again. My phone was still in my hand from earlier, and before I could second-guess myself, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need police to come to my house, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. My husband, who I was told died 2 years ago, is on my porch with another woman and child. I believe he may have committed fraud. The dispatcher took my information and promised to send officers right away. I hung up and returned to watching through the window. David had stopped pacing and was now sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. Maria was looking around nervously, as if she was beginning to realize that their reception here wasn't going to be what David had promised her. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, a middle-aged man and a younger woman, approached my front porch with the careful posture of people who had learned to expect the unexpected. I watched David stand up, his face pale, as they asked to see identification. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The January air was bitter cold, and I realized I was still wearing just my houseclothes, leggings, a sweater and slippers. But the cold felt appropriate somehow. Everything in my life had just become cold. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez," the female officer said. "You called about a situation involving your deceased husband." "This is David Wells," I said, pointing at the man who had once promised to love me until death do us part. He supposedly died in a construction accident in South America 23 months ago. The State Department called to inform me. I held a funeral. I collected his life insurance, and now he's here with his new family. Officer Martinez, the male officer, looked between David and me with the expression of someone who had seen everything, but was still occasionally surprised. "Sir, do you have identification?" David reached into his wallet and pulled out papers. Not an American passport, I noticed. Not the identification of David Wells. "David Santos," he said quietly, handing over what looked like South American identity documents. "From Colombia." "And Mrs. Wells," Officer Rodriguez turned to me. "You were officially notified of your husband's death?" I went inside and retrieved the folder I had kept with all of David's final paperwork. Death certificate, insurance claims, correspondence from the State Department, documentation from Harrison Associates. 2 years of paperwork that proved David Wells had died in South America. Officer Martinez studied the documents while Officer Rodriguez took statements from David and Maria. I caught fragments of their conversation, something about a hospital with no records, about amnesia, about starting over. All of it sounded like the plot of a bad soap opera. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez approached me after 20 minutes of discussion. "This is a complex situation. Your husband appears to have valid identification as David Santos, a Colombian citizen. The woman, Maria Santos, has documentation showing they were married in Colombia 18 months ago. 18 months ago. While I was still deep in grief, still seeing Dr. Reed twice a week, still crying myself to sleep most nights. What about the death certificate?" I asked, holding up the official document that had been the foundation of my grief. "That's going to require federal investigation," Officer Martinez said. "If there was fraud involved in the reporting of his death, that's a matter for the FBI and the State Department. What we can address tonight is the immediate situation." The immediate situation. What a clinical way to describe the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. "Are they trespassing?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Do you want them removed from your property?" I looked at David, really looked at him for the first time since opening the door. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Hope? Fear? Regret? It was impossible to tell. "Yes," I said. "I want them gone." David's face crumpled. "Catherine, please. We have nowhere else to go. We used all our money to get here. I thought you would understand once I explained." "Explained what?" The words came out louder than I intended, and Diego looked up from his mother's lap with wide, frightened eyes. I forced myself to lower my voice, but the fury remained. "Explained how you let me plan your funeral while you were playing house in South America. Explained how you let me collect your life insurance money while you were very much alive. Explained how you committed bigamy by marrying her while still legally married to me." Maria's face went white. She said something rapidly to David in Spanish, and he responded in the same language. Their son looked back and forth between his parents, clearly picking up on the tension even if he didn't understand the words. "Sir," Officer Martinez addressed David, "you need to leave this property now. We can discuss resources for temporary shelter, but you cannot stay here without the homeowner's permission." "Catherine," David tried once more, "I know I hurt you. I know this looks terrible, but the accident was real. I really did almost die. When I woke up with no memory, no identification, it felt like a gift, a chance to become someone better." "Someone better?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You became someone who lets his wife believe he's dead. You became someone who commits fraud. You became someone who destroys lives. How exactly is that better?" He had no answer for that. Maria stood up, balancing Diego on her hip, and whispered something to David. She looked at me with what might have been sympathy, but it was hard to tell. "We will go," she said in her accented English. "But David is right about one thing. We have no money, nowhere to stay. We sold everything to come here because he said you would help us." He had told her I would help them. After everything he had done, after the magnitude of his betrayal, he had actually believed I would welcome his new family into my home. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "That's not my problem," I said, and I meant it. "You made your choices, both of you. Now you get to live with them." The officers helped them gather their few bags from beside my porch and walked them to the street. I watched from my window as they stood under the streetlight, clearly having no idea where to go next. Maria was on a cell phone, probably trying to find someone who could help them. David kept looking back at my house, as if he was still hoping I might change my mind. I closed the curtains and locked the front door. Then I locked the back door. Then I checked all the windows. The man who used to be my husband was now a stranger, and strangers don't get to enter my home without permission. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Catherine, it's David. Please don't hang up." "How did you get this number?" I asked, though I knew it was a stupid question. He had lived in this house. Of course he knew my phone number. "I'm calling from Maria's phone. Catherine, I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. The accident was real. I was supposed to be on that bridge when it collapsed. But I was delayed, and when I got there it was chaos. Bodies everywhere, wounded people screaming. In all the confusion, my identification got lost or destroyed. So you decided to become someone else instead of trying to contact your wife?" There was a long pause. "I was unconscious for 3 days. When I woke up, no one knew who I was, and Maria was there, volunteering at the hospital, taking care of the injured. She was so kind, so gentle, and I thought maybe this was fate." Fate. He thought destroying my life was fate. "Where's your wedding ring, David?" Another pause. I lost it in the accident." "No, you didn't. You threw it away when you decided to become David Santos. You made a choice to erase me from your life. Don't blame fate for your cowardice." "Catherine, I tried to come back. After I married Maria, after Diego was born, I tried to come back to you. But so much time had passed, and I didn't know how to explain. I was scared you would hate me." "I do hate you." The silence stretched between us. In the background, I could hear Diego crying and Maria trying to comfort him in Spanish. "We're at a motel now," David said finally. "Room 237 at the Budget Inn on Maple Street. If you change your mind, if you want to talk, I won't. Catherine, I still love you." Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. I doubled over, clutching my stomach, fighting the urge to vomit. "Don't you ever say that to me again," I whispered. "You don't get to love me. You don't get to have loved me. Love doesn't do what you did. Love doesn't let someone suffer like you let me suffer." I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I walked to my bedroom, to the closet where David's clothes still hung. The shirts I had been too heartbroken to pack away. The jackets that still smelled faintly of his cologne. the ties I had bought him for Christmas and birthdays and anniversaries. I grabbed an armload of his clothes and carried them to the kitchen. I stuffed them into garbage bags, not caring if they wrinkled or tore. Every shirt, every pair of pants, every sock and piece of underwear went into those black bags. The cologne bottles from the bathroom counter, the watch he had forgotten to take on his last trip, the books on his nightstand, everything that had once been his. By 2 a.m, I had erased every trace of David Wells from my house. 6 garbage bags sat by the curb, ready for pickup. The empty spaces in closets and drawers looked like missing teeth, but they felt like freedom. I made a cup of tea and sat in my reading chair, the same chair where I had been peacefully reading just hours ago, back when my biggest concern was whether to take that pottery class Dr. Reed had suggested. Now I was a woman whose husband had risen from the dead with a new family in tow. The phone rang again, a different, unknown number this time. "Catherine, please don't hang up. This is Maria." I almost did hang up, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded as tired and broken as I felt. "What do you want?" "I want you to know that I did not know he was married when I met him. He told me he had no family, no one in America who would miss him. If I had known about you, I would never. I am not that kind of woman." I believed her. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at me, a recognition of woman to woman that suggested she understood betrayal as intimately as I did. "How long were you together before you married him?" I asked. 6 months. I was volunteering at the hospital where they brought him. He had no identification, no memory of his past. The doctors said it might never come back. I helped him learn Spanish better, helped him find work. He was so lost, so grateful for kindness. I fell in love with him. 6 months. They had dated for 6 months, been married for 18 months, and had a 4-year-old child. "Maria," I said carefully, "Diego is 4 years old." The silence on her end told me she was doing the same math I had just done. "David told me Diego was from my previous relationship," she said slowly. "But Diego looks just like him. And now that I think about it, the timing. He was your husband before he was mine, wasn't he?" Yes. We were very young. We divorced when I was pregnant because he said he wasn't ready to be a father. He left for America to work and send money, but the money stopped coming after a few months. I raised Diego alone for years. The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. David hadn't just faked his death to run away with another woman. He had run away from Maria and his son first, come to America, married me, and then when faced with responsibility again, ran back to them with an elaborate lie about amnesia. "Maria, I think we both need to know the truth about who David really is." "Yes," she said quietly. "I think we do." The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Every muscle in my body ached, and for a brief, merciful moment I thought the previous night had been a nightmare. Then I saw the empty spaces in my closet where David's clothes had hung, and reality crashed over me all over again. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone. Maria had given me her number before we hung up, and I knew I needed to call her. As much as I hated the situation, she was the only other person who could help me understand what David had really done. Before I could lose my nerve, I dialed her number. "Hello, Catherine." Her voice was soft, tired. I did not sleep much either. "Maria, we need to meet. There are things I need to know, and I think you need to know them too." "Yes, but David is here at the motel. He cannot know we are talking." I thought for a moment. "Can you come to my house? Bring Diego if you need to. We can talk while he plays." There was a pause. "Are you sure? After everything?" "I'm sure. I need answers, and I think you deserve them too." An hour later, Maria knocked softly on my front door. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, probably both. Diego clung to her leg, obviously confused and frightened by the tension he couldn't understand. I led them to my living room and offered Diego some of the children's books I kept for when my neighbour's grandchildren visited. He settled on the floor with a picture book, while Maria and I sat across from each other like generals negotiating a ceasefire. "Tell me about when you first met David," I said. "The real version, not the story he told me." Maria took a deep breath. "We met when we were 18. I was working at my uncle's restaurant in Bogota, and David was there with other American workers. He was charming, handsome, said he was going to make a lot of money and take me to America someday. When did you get married?" 6 months later. I was so young, so stupid in love. My family warned me about marrying a foreigner, but I thought I knew better." She looked at Diego, who was absorbed in his book. "I got pregnant right away. David seemed happy at first, but as the pregnancy progressed, he became distant, angry. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that a baby would ruin our plans. The picture was becoming clearer, and it made me sick." "What happened when Diego was born?" "David left 2 weeks later. He said he needed to go to America to make money for us, that he would send for us soon. He sent money for the first few months, then nothing. I divorced him when Diego was 6 months old because I needed to be able to work and support my son." "And you never heard from him again until the hospital?" "Never. For 4 years, nothing. Diego would ask about his father sometimes, but what could I tell him? That his father abandoned us." She wiped her eyes. "When David appeared at the hospital with no memory, no identification, I thought maybe it was God giving us a second chance. He seemed different, kinder, more responsible. He was good to Diego, patient with him." I felt a wave of nausea. "Maria, David didn't have amnesia. He knew exactly who he was. He knew about you, about Diego, about me. He just decided to pretend he didn't remember because it was easier than taking responsibility." Her face went white. "How do you know this?" I got up and retrieved a box from my bedroom. Photos, letters, documents from David's life with me. I spread them on the coffee table between us. Wedding photos, vacation pictures, love letters he had written me during our courtship, our marriage certificate. "We were married 8 years ago," I said, showing her our wedding photo. "David never mentioned being married before. He told me he had never been married, never had children. He said I was his first real love." Maria stared at the photos with the expression of someone watching their world collapse. "He was already married to you when he came back to me at the hospital?" "Very married. We owned this house together. We had joint bank accounts, shared credit cards, a life together. While you were nursing him back to health, I was here making his favourite dinner every night, waiting for him to call." She picked up one of David's letters to me, dated just 3 months before he left for South America. It was full of plans for our future. Talks of maybe starting a family, renovating the kitchen, growing old together. "He wrote this while he was still married to you," she said, her voice hollow. "And he was writing similar things to you while married to me." I pulled out my phone and showed her the last text messages David had sent me before his supposed death. Messages about missing me, about coming home soon, about how much he loved me. Maria started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that came from the soul. Diego looked up from his book, concerned, and went to comfort his mother. She pulled him onto her lap and held him tight, whispering reassurances in Spanish. "I am so sorry," she said to me through her tears. "I never knew about you. If I had known he was married—" "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. David is very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? "What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "Maria, David committed multiple crimes. He faked his death to collect insurance money. He committed bigamy by marrying you while still married to me. He fraud against both the American and Colombian governments. He owes money to insurance companies, to his employer, probably to the government in taxes." Her eyes widened. "Will we get in trouble? Will they take Diego away?" You're a victim too. You didn't know he was committing fraud. But David is going to face consequences for what he's done. What kind of consequences? Before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a black sedan parked in my driveway. 2 people in dark suits stood on my porch. FBI, the woman announced when I opened the door, showing me her badge. Agent Sarah Chen. This is Agent Michael Brooks. We're here about David Wells. I let them in, my heart pounding. Maria had gone pale again, instinctively pulling Diego closer to her. Mrs. Wells, Agent Chen said, settling into my living room. We received a report about your husband's alleged death and subsequent reappearance. This is a very serious matter involving potential federal crimes. What kind of crimes? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Agent Brooks consulted his notes. Insurance fraud for starters. Your husband's life insurance policy paid out $500,000. If he faked his death, that's $500,000 in fraudulent claims. There's also the matter of his Social Security death benefits, his final paycheck from Harrison Associates, and potential tax evasion. What about immigration fraud? I looked at Maria. He entered Colombia illegally after faking his death, then married a Colombian citizen under false pretenses. Agent Chen made notes. That's also possible. Ma'am, she addressed Maria, are you Mrs. Santos? Yes, Maria whispered, but I did not know he was already married. I did not know about any of this. We understand that, ma'am. You're not in trouble. But we need to ask you some questions about your relationship with the suspect. The suspect? That's what David was now. Not my husband, not Maria's husband, but a suspected criminal. Agent Brooks turned back to me. Mrs. Wells, we need to know everything about your husband's supposed death and your interactions with him since his return. For the next 2 hours, I told them everything. The phone call from the State Department, the funeral, the grief counselling, the insurance claims, David's appearance on my doorstep with Maria and Diego. The phone calls afterward. Maria told them about meeting David at the hospital, his claimed amnesia, their relationship and marriage, their decision to come to America. Agent Chen took detailed notes and recorded parts of our statements. Where is Mr. Wells now? Agent Brooks asked. The Budget Inn on Maple Street, room 237, I said. At least that's where he said they were staying. Agent Chen made a phone call, speaking quietly to someone about surveillance and potential flight risk. When she hung up, she looked serious. Mrs. Wells, there's something you need to know. We've been investigating discrepancies in the South American incident for several months. Your husband wasn't the only American reported dead who may have survived. There appears to have been a systematic fraud scheme involving workers who wanted to disappear from their lives in America. My blood went cold. You mean David planned this? We're still investigating, but it appears that several American workers may have paid bribes to local officials to be declared dead in the bridge collapse. It wasn't an accident or a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was premeditated. Maria gasped. He planned to abandon us, to fake his death. It appears so. Mrs. Santos, did your husband ever discuss his life in America? Did he seem to know specific details about places and people here? Maria thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. He knew exactly how to get here. He knew the bus routes, the neighbourhoods. He said it came back to him gradually, but now I think he always remembered. The full scope of David's betrayal was becoming clear. He hadn't lost his memory in an accident. He had deliberately chosen to disappear from his responsibilities to me, leaving me to grieve him while he started over with Maria and Diego. And when that life became complicated or boring, he had decided to bring his new family to America, probably expecting me to somehow accept the situation. What happens now? I asked Agent Chen. We arrest him. He'll be charged with federal crimes that could result in decades in prison. The insurance companies will want their money back, plus penalties and interest. What about Maria and Diego? Agent Brooks looked sympathetic. "Mrs. Santos, you'll need to speak with immigration attorneys about your status here. Your marriage to the suspect was based on fraud, which complicates things, but since you were also a victim of his deception, there may be options available to you." After the agents left to coordinate David's arrest, Maria and I sat in my living room in stunned silence. Diego had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted by the emotional chaos he couldn't understand. "Catherine," Maria said quietly, "what will happen to us? I have no money, no place to go. And if they deport us back to Colombia, how will I explain to my family why I came here? They think I married a good American man who would take care of us." I looked at this woman who had been as deceived as I had been, who had trusted the same man who had destroyed both of our lives. Her son, David's son, slept peacefully, innocent of his father's crimes. "You can stay here tonight," I heard myself say, "until you figure out what to do next." I could not ask that of you, not after everything. "You're not asking, I'm offering. Maria, we're both victims of the same man. We both believed his lies, both trusted him with our lives. Neither of us deserves to be punished for his crimes." She started crying again, but these tears seemed different. Not just grief, but maybe relief. "Thank you. I do not know how I will repay your kindness." "You don't need to repay anything. We're survivors, both of us, and survivors help each other." As I made up the guest room for Maria and Diego, I wondered what David had expected to happen when he showed up at my door. Had he really thought I would welcome him and his family with open arms? Had he imagined some twisted scenario where we could all live together happily, sharing the man who had betrayed us both? The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Agent Chen. "Mrs. Wells, we've arrested David Wells at the motel. He's being held without bail pending trial. You should know that when we took him into custody, he asked us to tell you that he's sorry and that he never meant for any of this to happen." "Agent Chen," I said, "please tell him that sorry doesn't bring back 2 years of my life. Sorry doesn't erase the pain he caused. And sorry doesn't excuse what he did to Maria and Diego." "I'll pass that along, Ma'am." After I hung up, I found Maria sitting at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the dark street. "They arrested him," I told her. She nodded without surprise. "Good. He needs to face what he has done." "Are you okay?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I think I am grieving," she said finally. "Not for the man who is in jail now, but for the man I thought he was. The man who was kind to my son, who made me believe in love again. That man never existed, did he?" "No," I said gently. "He didn't. But that doesn't mean we were stupid for believing in him. It means he was skilled at deception." "What will you do now? With your life, I mean?" I sat down across from her, considering the question. 24 hours ago, I had been a woman slowly healing from widowhood, learning to build a new life alone. Now I was a woman whose husband was alive and in jail, whose marriage had been built on lies, whose entire past needed to be re-examined. "I don't know," I admitted, "but for the first time in 2 years, I feel like I might want to find out." The first week after David's arrest passed in a strange blur of phone calls, legal meetings and paperwork. My house, which had been so quiet during my months of grief, was now filled with the sounds of Maria's gentle Spanish conversations with Diego and the constant ringing of my telephone. Insurance investigators called daily. Lawyers from David's former company wanted statements. The IRS needed documentation about the death benefits I had received and spent. Agent Chen checked in regularly with updates about the federal case. Each conversation peeled back another layer of David's deception, revealing the careful planning that had gone into his fake death. Maria proved to be surprisingly helpful during these conversations. Her English was better than she initially let on, and she had a sharp memory for details about David's behavior during their time together in Colombia. She remembered inconsistencies in his stories about his recovered memories that now made perfect sense. He always knew exactly where things were in American stores, she told Agent Chen during one of our joint interviews. He said his memory was coming back gradually, but he never hesitated when shopping. He knew which aisles to find things in, which brands were good. That is not how someone with amnesia would behave. And he had American money, I added, remembering something that had just occurred to me. When he showed up here, Maria, did you wonder where he got dollars for the trip? Maria's eyes widened. He said he had been saving pesos and converted them, but now that you mention it, he had more cash than our savings could have covered. Much more. Agent Chen made notes. We're investigating whether Mr. Wells had hidden accounts or accomplices who helped finance his new identity. The amount of coordination required for this scheme suggests he wasn't working alone. The insurance company investigators were less sympathetic. They made it clear that they would be seeking full restitution of the $500,000 life insurance payout, plus interest and penalties. The fact that I had spent the money innocently didn't matter to them. As far as they were concerned, I had been enriched by fraud and would need to pay it back. But I don't have $500,000, I told Mr. Patterson, the lead investigator, during a particularly tense phone call. I used that money to pay off our mortgage, to cover funeral expenses, to live on during the months I couldn't work. I can't just write you a check. Mrs. Wells, that's not our problem. The money was obtained fraudulently, regardless of your knowledge of the fraud. We'll be filing a civil suit to recover our losses, which may include placing liens on your assets. After I hung up, Maria found me crying at the kitchen table. Diego was napping, and the house was quiet except for the sound of my sobs. What is wrong? She asked, sitting beside me. I explained about the insurance company's demands, about how they wanted money I no longer had, money I had spent in good faith while grieving my supposedly dead husband. That is not fair, Maria said indignantly. You did nothing wrong. Fair doesn't seem to matter much in legal cases, I replied, wiping my eyes. My lawyer says I need to prepare for the possibility of losing the house, my car, my savings. Everything David and I built together could be gone because of what he did. Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. Catherine, I want to help you fight this. What do you mean? I mean, I want to testify about David's lies, about how he deceived both of us. I want to help prove that you were a victim too, not an accomplice. I looked at this woman who had every reason to hate me. After all, I was legally David's real wife, which made her marriage invalid and her son technically illegitimate in the eyes of American law. Instead, she was offering to help me. Maria, you don't owe me anything. You have your own problems to worry about. We both have the same problem, she said firmly. David. And I think we will both be stronger if we face this together instead of alone. That afternoon, we walked to the elementary school near my house to pick up information about enrolling Diego. Maria had decided to stay in America and fight for legal residency rather than return to Colombia in shame. She had contacted an immigration lawyer who thought she might have a case as a victim of marriage fraud. The lawyer says because David used false identity to marry me, and because I was not aware he was already married, I might qualify for a special visa for crime victims, she explained as we walked. But it will take time, maybe years. What will you do for work? For money? I was a teacher in Colombia. If I can get work authorization, maybe I can teach Spanish or work as a translator. Diego needs stability, needs to start school and make friends. We stopped at a small park on the way home, and Diego ran to the playground while Maria and I sat on a bench. It was the first time in days that we had been somewhere peaceful, away from phones and lawyers and investigators. Can I ask you something? Maria said. Were you happy with David? Before all this? I considered the question carefully. I thought I was. He could be charming, attentive when he wanted to be. But looking back now, I realized there were always signs that something was wrong. He was secretive about his work trips, evasive when I asked too many questions about his past. And he never really talked about the future in concrete terms. It was always, someday we'll do this, or eventually we'll have that. Yes, Maria nodded. He was the same with me, always promising things that never came, always making excuses for why plans had to change. Were you happy with him? The second time, I mean, when you thought he had amnesia. I thought I was, but now I see it was not real happiness. It was me trying to fix a broken man, trying to give Diego the father I thought he deserved. The David I fell in love with the second time was a person I had created in my mind, not the person he really was. We watched Diego play on the swings, laughing at something only he found funny. He seemed to be adapting well to the chaos of the past week, resilient in the way children often are. "Maria," I said, "I've been thinking about something. What if you and Diego stayed here? Not just temporarily, but permanently." She looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we made this arrangement official? The house is big enough for all of us. Diego could have his own room, a stable place to live while you sort out your immigration status. And honestly, I could use the company. The help with bills wouldn't hurt either." "Catherine, I could not ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. We're both starting over, both trying to rebuild our lives after David destroyed them. Maybe we can do it better together than apart." That evening, after Diego had gone to bed, Maria and I sat in my living room discussing the practical details of such an arrangement. We were interrupted by a call from my lawyer, Susan Martinez, who had news about David's case. "Catherine, the federal prosecutor wants to offer David a plea deal. He's willing to plead guilty to insurance fraud and marriage fraud in exchange for a lighter sentence, probably 8 to 10 years instead of the 25 to 30 he's facing if convicted at trial." "What does that mean for me? For the insurance money?" "The plea deal includes full restitution to the insurance companies. David would be required to cooperate in recovering all fraudulently obtained funds. That could still mean you lose your house and savings." I felt sick. What if I don't agree to the plea deal? What if he goes to trial? Then there's a chance he could be convicted of more serious charges and get a longer sentence. But there's also a chance he could be acquitted of some charges which might limit the restitution requirements. It's a gamble. After I hung up, Maria and I sat in silence for a while. "What will you do?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Part of me wants him to face the full consequences of what he's done. But another part of me just wants this to be over so I can move on with my life." "Perhaps," Maria said thoughtfully, "there is a third option." "What do you mean?" "What if we fight back? Not just legally, but really fight back. What if we find a way to make David face consequences that he cannot escape with a plea deal?" I looked at her curiously. "What kind of consequences?" Maria's eyes had taken on a determined glint that I hadn't seen before. "The kind that come from the truth being told publicly. The kind that come from everyone knowing exactly what kind of man he is." Over the next few days, Maria's suggestion grew into a plan. We began documenting everything, not just for the lawyers and investigators, but for a different purpose entirely. We compiled a timeline of David's lies, his manipulations, his calculated cruelty to both of us. We gathered photos, documents, recordings of phone calls he had made to me from jail, trying to convince me to stand by him through this difficult time. "He still thinks he can charm his way out of consequences," I told Maria after one particularly infuriating call. "He actually asked me to put money in his commissary account." "He asked me the same thing," she replied. "He said Diego needs his father and that I should forgive him for our son's sake." We also began reaching out to other people in David's life. His co-workers at Harrison Associates were shocked to learn he was alive and more shocked to learn about the fraud. Several admitted they had noticed irregularities in his expense reports and travel vouchers, but had never reported them. "David always had more cash than his salary would explain," one colleague told us. "He claimed it was from wise investments, but now I wonder if he was skimming from project budgets." We discovered that David had been involved in at least 3 other suspicious incidents over the years, times when money had gone missing or when his stories about his whereabouts didn't add up. A pattern of deception and financial manipulation that went far beyond what he had done to Maria and me. Most importantly, we found 2 other women. Jennifer in Phoenix had dated David for 6 months during a work assignment there, 3 years into our marriage. She still had the engagement ring he had given her, and the photos of the house he claimed he was buying for them. Sarah in Denver had been told David was divorced and looking for a fresh start. He had lived with her for 2 months during another supposed work trip, had met her parents, had promised to relocate to Denver permanently. Neither woman had known about me, about Maria, or about each other. Both had been devastated when David suddenly disappeared from their lives with no explanation. "How many of us are there?" Jennifer asked when Maria tracked her down through social media. "How many women did this man lie to?" As we pieced together David's secret life, a picture emerged of a man who was addicted to the thrill of deception, who created new identities and relationships, like other people collected souvenirs. Maria and I hadn't just been his victims, we had been his longest-running cons. "You know what I think?" I told Maria as we organised all our evidence. "I think David never intended to stay dead. I think this was all part of some larger scheme, and showing up at my door with you was the next phase." "What kind of scheme?" "Think about it. He probably planned to manipulate both of us into supporting him. Maybe he thought we would compete for him, or that I would pay him to go away and leave me alone. Or maybe he thought he could maintain relationships with both of us, getting money and support from multiple sources. Like collecting Social Security as a dead man while also having 2 wives supporting him." "Exactly. David never does anything unless there's something in it for him." That night I made a decision that would change everything. I called Agent Chen and asked for a meeting, not to discuss David's plea deal, but to share everything we had discovered about his other victims and his pattern of fraud. "Agent Chen," I said when she arrived the next morning, "I think you've been investigating the wrong crime. This isn't just about insurance fraud or fake death. This is about a man who has been systematically destroying women's lives for years, and I think Maria and I can help you prove it." Agent Chen's expression grew more serious as Maria and I laid out everything we had discovered. We spread photographs, documents, phone records, and printed emails across my dining room table like pieces of a massive puzzle. Each item told part of the story of David's double life, but together they painted a picture of calculated long-term deception that went far beyond simple insurance fraud. "These are significant findings," Agent Chen said, photographing each document methodically. "If we can prove a pattern of fraud spanning multiple states and involving multiple victims, we're looking at federal racketeering charges. That carries a much longer sentence than simple insurance fraud." "What about Jennifer and Sarah?" I asked. "The other women David was involved with?" "We'll need to interview them, get their full statements. If he defrauded them financially or used fake identities with them, those become additional counts." She looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Wells, Mrs. Santos, what you've uncovered here could be the difference between David serving 8 years and David serving 25 to life." Maria leaned forward. "What do we need to do?" "First, we need you both to wear recording devices when you visit David in jail. If we can get him to admit to the broader scheme, it will strengthen our case significantly." My stomach clenched. "You want us to visit him? To pretend we forgive him?" I know it's asking a lot, but manipulators like David often can't resist bragging about their cleverness, especially to people they think they've fooled. If you can get him talking. "He calls us every day," Maria said quietly. "He keeps trying to convince us that he's a victim too, that the accident made him confused, that he never meant to hurt anyone." Agent Chen nodded. "Those calls are already recorded, but an in-person visit where you appear sympathetic might get him to reveal more details about his methods or accomplices." The thought of sitting across from David and pretending I cared about him made me physically ill, but I knew it was necessary. He needed to face full consequences for what he had done, not just to Maria and me, but to Jennifer, Sarah, and whoever else we hadn't discovered yet. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want Maria with me." That might actually be better. He might feel more confident if he thinks he's manipulating both of you at once. We spent the rest of the morning being fitted with recording equipment and coached on how to draw David into admitting details about his crimes. Agent Chen warned us that visiting someone in federal detention was emotionally difficult, even under normal circumstances. He's going to try to make you feel guilty, she explained. He's going to blame his actions on circumstances beyond his control. He's going to promise to change, to make things right. Don't believe any of it. Remember, this man let you plan his funeral while he was starting a new family. The Federal Detention Center was a grim, concrete building that looked like a fortress. Maria and I went through multiple security checkpoints, surrendering our phones, keys and purses. The recording device was so small it was undetectable, but I felt like everyone could see it. David was brought into the visiting room wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. He had lost weight, and his hair needed cutting. For a moment, seeing him like this, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered Diego asking his mother why the angry lady at the door didn't want to see his papa. "Catherine," he said, standing up as if to hug me. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I sat down across from him, Maria beside me. "We need to talk, David. Both of us." His eyes flicked between us nervously. "I know you're both angry. I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance." "Explain what?" Maria asked. "How you lied about having amnesia? How you let Catherine believe you were dead while you were married to me?" "The amnesia was real at first," he said, leaning forward earnestly. "When I woke up in that hospital, I really didn't remember anything. It was only gradually that things came back to me. I had heard this story before, but now I listened with different ears, waiting for the contradictions Agent Chen had taught us to watch for." "When did you remember about me?" I asked. "When did you remember that you had a wife in America?" It was after Maria and I were already involved. When the memories came back, I didn't know how to tell her. I was scared she would leave, take Diego away from me. "So you decided to keep lying instead of taking responsibility," Maria said. "You decided to commit bigamy rather than be honest." I was confused, traumatized. I wasn't thinking clearly. "David," I said carefully, "what about Jennifer in Phoenix and Sarah in Denver? Were you confused and traumatized during those relationships too?" His face went pale. For a moment the mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes before he recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We found them, David. We found the engagement ring you gave Jennifer. We found the photos Sarah has of you at her family's Christmas dinner. We know about the house you promised to buy with Jennifer and the job you claimed to have waiting in Denver." "You've been busy," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now that I had never heard before. "Investigating me like I'm some kind of criminal." "You are a criminal," Maria said flatly. "You married me while still married to Catherine. You collected insurance money for your fake death. You lied to multiple women and took money from them under false pretenses." David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his next move. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the remorseful, confused victim he had been portraying. "You want to know the truth?" he said, looking directly at me. "Fine. The truth is that you were boring, Catherine. 15 years of the same routine, the same conversations, the same mediocre life. When I got to South America and met Maria again, saw what life could be like with some excitement, some passion, I realized I had wasted years of my life being married to someone who never challenged me, never surprised me." The cruelty of his words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm to keep him talking. "So you decided to fake your death rather than ask for a divorce?" "Divorce would have meant splitting assets, paying alimony, dealing with lawyers and paperwork and drama. This way was cleaner. You got insurance money, I got freedom, everyone won." "Everyone won?" Maria's voice was sharp with anger. "What about me, David? What about Diego? Did we win when you lied to us about who you were? You won because you got the best version of me, not the man trapped in a boring marriage, but the man who was free to choose to be with you." The narcissism in his statement was breathtaking. He genuinely seemed to believe that his lies had been gifts to us. "And Jennifer?" I pressed. "And Sarah? What did they win?" He shrugged. They got to experience what it was like to be with someone who could show them a different kind of life. I broadened their horizons. You broke their hearts, David. You made them believe you loved them, then disappeared without explanation. Sometimes people need to learn that life doesn't always work out the way they plan. I taught them that. I stared at this man who had shared my bed for 15 years, who had promised to love and cherish me, who had once cried at our wedding when he said his vows. This stranger wearing David's face, speaking in David's voice, but revealing a soul so empty and selfish that I wondered how I had never seen it before. What about the other men? Maria asked suddenly. The men who helped you fake your death. Were they teaching their wives lessons too? David's eyes sharpened. What other men? Agent Chen told us there were other Americans who supposedly died in that bridge collapse, other men who paid bribes to disappear from their old lives. I don't know what you're talking about. But his body language said otherwise. He had gone rigid, his hands clenched into fists on the metal table. How much did it cost, David? I asked. How much did you pay to be declared dead? I told you. I was unconscious. I didn't pay anyone anything. That's not what Carlos Mendez says. I was bluffing. We hadn't found anyone named Carlos Mendez. But David's reaction confirmed that we were on the right track. Carlos is lying if he said I paid him. He's just trying to reduce his own sentence by making up stories. Bingo. Carlos was real, and David had just admitted knowing him. What's Carlos being sentenced for, David? He realized his mistake and clamped his mouth shut, but it was too late. He had given us the confirmation we needed that there was a larger conspiracy, other people involved in the fraud scheme. You know what I think? I said, leaning back in my chair. I think you planned this for months, maybe years. I think you found other men who wanted to disappear from their responsibilities, and you worked together to create a mass casualty event that would provide cover for your fake deaths. I think you're not just a liar and a bigamist. You're the ringleader of a criminal organization. Prove it, he said, and the mask was completely off now. This was the real David, cold, arrogant, convinced of his own superiority. We will, Maria said calmly. We will prove all of it, and when we do, you won't be getting any plea deal. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. And you know what the beautiful irony is, I added, standing up to leave. While you're rotting in a cell, Maria and Diego and I will be building the kind of family you never knew how to create. A family based on honesty, loyalty, and love. Real love, not the fake emotion you use to manipulate people. As we walked toward the door, David called after us. Catherine, Maria, you need me. You can't just abandon family. I turned back one last time. Family doesn't abandon family, David. Family doesn't let each other believe they're dead while building new lives with other people. You taught us what family isn't. Now we get to discover what family actually is. The drive home was quiet. Both Maria and I were emotionally drained from the confrontation, but there was also a sense of relief. We had gotten what we needed. David's admission that there were other people involved, his confirmation that the fake death had been planned, his casual dismissal of the pain he had caused multiple women. Agent Chen is going to be very pleased, Maria said as we pulled into my driveway. Are you okay? That was brutal. I am sad, she admitted, but not for the man in that prison. I am sad for the woman I was who believed his lies. I am sad for the time I wasted trying to fix someone who was never broken, just selfish. That evening, as Agent Chen listened to the recording of our visit, I felt something shift inside me. For 2 years I had been defined by David's supposed death. For the past month I had been defined by his betrayal. But sitting in my living room with Maria and Diego, listening to Agent Chen explain how our evidence would help convict not just David, but an entire network of men who had abandoned their families, I realized I was no longer defined by what David had done to me. I was defined by what I was doing about it. Mrs. Wells, Mrs. Santos, Agent Chen said as she prepared to leave. What you've accomplished here goes far beyond seeking justice for yourselves. You've uncovered a criminal network that has destroyed dozens of families. You've prevented David and his associates from victimizing anyone else. You should be proud. After she left, I found Diego in the backyard, playing with the neighborhood cats that had started visiting since Maria and I had been putting out food for them. He was laughing at their antics, completely absorbed in the simple joy of the moment. "Catherine," Maria said, joining me at the window, "I have been thinking about what you said, about us staying here permanently." "And?" "I think Diego would be happy here. I think I would be happy here. But I do not want you to feel obligated to take care of us because of what David did." I watched Diego carefully pet one of the cats, speaking to it in gentle Spanish. This little boy, who was David's biological son but bore no responsibility for his father's crimes, had brought more genuine happiness into my house in the past month than David had in the last several years of our marriage. "Maria," I said, "I'm not taking care of you out of obligation. I'm inviting you to stay because you and Diego make my life better. Because after years of living with someone who saw me as an obstacle to his happiness, it's beautiful to live with people who see me as part of their happiness." She smiled, the first truly peaceful smile I had seen from her since this nightmare began. "Then we will stay. And we will build something David could never understand. A real family." 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching David being led away in shackles after receiving a sentence of 35 years without the possibility of parole. The judge had been thorough in explaining his reasoning: multiple counts of insurance fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, bigamy and racketeering. The criminal network David had helped organize had defrauded insurance companies out of over $3 million and had destroyed the lives of dozens of families. Maria sat beside me, holding my hand as we watched the man who had betrayed us both disappear through a side door. Diego was at school, finally settled into 2nd grade and making friends with children who didn't know or care that his father was a federal prisoner. "How do you feel?" Maria asked as we walked out of the courthouse into the bright October sunshine. I considered the question carefully. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." The legal battles had been exhausting but ultimately successful. The insurance companies had agreed to settle for a fraction of what they had originally demanded after our evidence proved I had been as much a victim as they were. The federal prosecutor had helped negotiate a deal where I kept my house and most of my savings in exchange for my testimony against David and his co-conspirators. More importantly, the immigration court had granted Maria and Diego permanent residency based on their status as victims of marriage fraud. Maria had found work as a Spanish translator for the county court system, and Diego had thrived in his new school environment. Jennifer from Phoenix had flown in for the sentencing, as had Sarah from Denver. Both women had provided victim impact statements that painted a devastating picture of David's systematic emotional abuse. We had stayed in touch throughout the legal process, forming an unlikely support group of women who had all fallen for the same man's lies. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," Jennifer told us over coffee after the hearing. "I thought I was stupid for believing him, for falling for his promises so completely." "We all thought that," Sarah added, "but the FBI psychologist explained that people like David are experts at finding and exploiting vulnerability. They study us, learn what we need to hear, then give us exactly that until we're emotionally dependent on them. The important thing," I said, "is that we survived. We found the strength to fight back, to seek justice not just for ourselves but for everyone he hurt." That evening, Maria and I sat on our back porch now officially since she had insisted on contributing to the mortgage payments, watching Diego practice soccer kicks against the fence. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the neighborhood was settling into its familiar dinner-time rhythm. "Catherine," Maria said, "can I tell you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course." "I think David did us a favor." I looked at her in surprise. "A favor?" "Not intentionally, of course. But his betrayal forced both of us to discover who we really are when we are not trying to please someone who cannot be pleased. I am stronger now than I was when I was trying to be the perfect wife to a man who never deserved my effort." She was right. The woman who had opened the door to find her supposedly dead husband standing there with another woman would never have had the courage to wear a wire into a federal prison. That woman would never have organised other victims to fight back against their abuser. That woman would never have opened her home and heart to a stranger's child. I keep thinking about what he said in that prison visit, I told her, about how I was boring, how our life together was mediocre. For weeks after that, I worried he was right. But now I realise he was telling me who he was, not who I am. What do you mean? Someone who finds love boring is someone who doesn't understand love. Someone who thinks stability is mediocre is someone who confuses chaos with excitement. David was never capable of appreciating what we had because he was never capable of genuine intimacy. Diego came running over, sweaty and happy from his soccer practice. "Mama, Catherine, can we have ice cream for dessert?" "If you finish your vegetables at dinner," Maria replied, ruffling his hair. As we went inside to start dinner preparations, I marvelled at how naturally we had fallen into this routine. Maria cooked traditional Colombian dishes that filled the house with wonderful smells. I helped Diego with his English homework while she worked on dinner. We took turns reading him bedtime stories in both languages. We had become a family not through marriage or blood, but through choice and commitment and the determination to heal together. The phone rang as we were setting the table. It was Dr. Reed, my former grief counsellor, checking in as she did periodically. "Catherine, you sound so different," she said after we had talked for a few minutes. "Lighter, somehow. Happier. I am happier. It turns out that grieving someone who was never really dead is much easier than grieving someone who was actually gone." "And how are things with Maria and Diego?" I looked across the kitchen at Maria, who was teaching Diego how to fold napkins properly, while he giggled at her exaggerated demonstrations of the wrong way to do it. "They're wonderful. We're building something I never thought was possible, a family based on honesty instead of deception, on mutual support instead of manipulation." "That's remarkable, Catherine. Most people in your situation would have found it impossible to move past the anger." "Oh, I was angry. I'm still angry sometimes. But I discovered that revenge isn't about destroying the person who hurt you. It's about building something better than what they destroyed." After dinner, as we cleaned up together while Diego watched cartoons in the living room, Maria brought up something we had been discussing for weeks. "I got a call today from that reporter, the one writing the article about marriage fraud victims. She wants to interview us both again. What do you think?" "I think we should do it. Not for revenge, but to warn other women about men like David, to help them recognise the signs before it's too late." I nodded. We had already spoken to several journalists about David's case, not to seek publicity, but to educate people about how sophisticated financial and emotional fraud had become. Our story had helped other women come forward with similar experiences, leading to additional arrests and prosecutions. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, drying a plate that had been David's favourite. "All those years I spent trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, trying to anticipate his needs and make him happy, all that wasted energy." "It was not wasted," Maria said firmly. "It taught you how to love genuinely, how to put someone else's well-being before your own. Those are not wasted skills. You just needed to find someone worthy of them." "Someone like Diego, you mean?" "Someone like Diego. Someone like me. Someone like yourself, finally." Later that evening, after Maria had tucked Diego into bed and read him his nightly story in Spanish, we sat in the living room with cups of tea, each reading our own books but comfortable in the shared silence. This was the kind of evening David would have called boring, but I recognised it now as something precious. Peace. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister Linda in Portland. "Saw the news article about David's sentencing. How are you holding up?" I typed back, "Better than ever. Come visit soon and meet my new family." New family? Long story. Good story. I'll tell you when you visit. As I put my phone away, I realised that for the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly the people I wanted to be with. Not because I was settling or making do or trying to fix something broken, but because I had actively chosen to build something good. "Maria," I said, looking up from my book. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates or legal documents. It's about showing up for each other, especially when things are difficult." She smiled and went back to her book, but I could see she was pleased. Outside, the neighbourhood was settling into sleep. Mrs. Patterson's house was dark. She went to bed early since her husband passed. The young couple with twins had their television flickering behind drawn curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking at something only it could hear. This was my life now. Not the life I had planned when I married David 15 years ago, not the life I had imagined when I thought I was a widow, but a life I had chosen consciously, deliberately, after learning the difference between love and manipulation, between family and possession, between happiness and the mere absence of obvious problems. In a few minutes, I would check that all the doors were locked, not because I was afraid of intruders, but because this house now contained people I genuinely wanted to protect. I would turn off the lights and go upstairs to a bedroom that was entirely my own, filled with furniture I had chosen and books I wanted to read, and photographs of people who actually cared about me. Tomorrow, Diego would wake up excited about a field trip to the Science Museum. Maria would start her day by calling her mother in Colombia to share photos of Diego's latest school project. I would go to work at the high school where my students knew me as the teacher who had survived something terrible and come out stronger. And David would wake up in a federal prison cell, facing 34.5 more years of consequences for his choices. He would probably spend some of that time trying to figure out how to manipulate the parole board when he became eligible in 2055. He would probably write letters to women he found through prison pen pal services, trying to convince them that he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But his letters wouldn't reach me. I had moved forward into a life he could never touch, never contaminate, never destroy again. My name is Catherine Wells. I am 47 years old, and I finally learned that the most important love story of your life is the one you write about learning to love yourself enough to choose happiness over familiarity, truth over convenience, and real family over the fake version that demands you shrink yourself to fit their needs. If you liked my story, remember that healing is possible, that betrayal can become the foundation for a stronger life, and that sometimes the family you choose is more powerful than the family you're born into. And if someone you love ever asks you to accept less than you deserve, to ignore your instincts, or to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger, remember David Wells and choose differently. Because you are worth more than being someone else's backup plan, their safety net, or their ATM with feelings. You are worth choosing every single day. Until next time, choose yourself. Choose truth. Choose the people who choose you back. With love and solidarity, Catherine.